May 26th in Australia is recognized as National Sorry Day. Beginning in 1998, National Sorry Day became the annual Day of Atonement for the removal of half-caste children from their families from 1910 through the 1970s. Although the first Sorry Day was in 1998, it would be another decade before the Australian government actually offered an apology. The day attempts to make amends for the stolen generation, the speculated 100,000 children who were forcibly removed from their families and placed into state and later church institutions. It was said that the light-skinned Indigenous children would have a better chance at assimilating if they were raised in this so-called more conducive environment. The key issue surrounding National Sorry Day is that many believe that the apology is dead until a treaty is signed. Australia is the only Commonwealth nation that doesn't have a treaty in place. Most all other colonized countries have established treaties, including the United States, Canada, and New Zealand, but none for Australia. A treaty is a way to establish that two parties recognize one another's sovereignty. Until the sovereignty of Indigenous Australians is acknowledged, the nation has little hope for reconciliation. The fight for a treaty has been a long and frustrating battle. Unfortunately, that fight is still ongoing today. The first call for a treaty occurred in 1972 by the Larrakia people. They encouraged other Indigenous communities to join in on the fight. Their plea was rejected. The issue reemerged in 1979 and was again denied. In 88, the topic of a treaty even divided the political parties. Instead, a process of reconciliation was decided upon. In 1997, a report entitled Bringing Them Home was released. In this report, the testimonies of over 500 Indigenous Australians were recorded. Although none of the information was new, the document legitimized the genocide against the first Australians. The report stated that the first step must be the acknowledgement of the truth and the delivery of an apology. Prime Minister John Howard had been elected just one short year before the report was published. Howard refused any form of compensation or talk of treaties. Although 70% of Australia's population supported an apology, Prime Minister Howard disagreed and refused to say sorry to the Indigenous people. When asked to issue an apology, John Howard said, "I do not believe, as a matter of principle, that one generation can accept responsibility for the acts of an earlier generation. I don't accept that as a matter of principle." He retained this belief throughout the 11 years he remained in power as Prime Minister. His time came to an end in 2007 when he was replaced by Kevin Rudd. On February 7, 2008, Rudd admitted that the government and Parliament were responsible for what he referred to as the blemished chapter of Australian history. Thousands gathered outside of Parliament House to celebrate Rudd's first act as the new Prime Minister. 11 years after the Bringing Them Home report called for an apology, Paul Rudd delivered his now famous "We're Sorry" speech. "We apologize for the laws and policies of successive parliaments and governments that have inflicted profound grief, suffering, and loss on these our fellow Australians. We apologize especially for the removal of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island children from their families, their communities, and their country, for the pain, suffering, and hurt of these stolen generations, their descendants, and for their families left behind. We say sorry. To the mothers and the fathers, the brothers and the sisters, for the breaking up of families and communities, we say sorry." Post-apology Australia is one of mixed emotions. In 2013, a case study was conducted by the University of Queensland, investigating the reaction of Indigenous people to the 2008 apology. The results concluded that 5 years after Paul Rudd's speech, the response by the Indigenous community was largely still unclear. A random selection of over 30 Indigenous men and women from varying locations across Australia were interviewed. Those that had a positive response said that they appreciated the apology and considered the day a positive emotional event. They said that hearing the apology helped them heal spiritually and improve their overall well-being. However, results also concluded that many thought that the apology had come too late to be meaningful. They also claimed that simply saying sorry alone was insufficient without actions to back it up. Others commented that the apology was undermined by the negative actions by the government that were already underway, like the intervention in Northern Territory. There were also claims that the apology focused too much on the stolen generation and needed to address all of the injustices. It was also critiqued for being too Western. In one interview, it was pointed out that in the Yolngu tradition, reconciliation or napuna required talking to someone face to face. Overall, the study concluded that forgiveness had not been granted. This April, Nayuka Gori, a young Indigenous activist, created a blunt viral video exposing how ridiculous it is that a treaty still hasn't been signed. She compares Australia to a theater with 100 seats. 97 are taken and 3 remain. Instead of just allowing the 3 remaining people to sit down, the whole theater has to vote, even though those 3 people arrive first. In the video, she refers to Paul Rudd's apology as a fluff piece for white people to feel good about themselves without any implications for the real world. She refers to Australia's history as Indigenous people losing stuff, getting scraps, and being told to be thankful, when what they want is their sovereignty to be recognized. National Sorry Day may attempt to atone for the stolen generation, however, actions speak louder than words. A treaty still hasn't been signed, and more Indigenous children are being removed from their homes than ever before in history. This occurrence is so widespread that many are beginning to refer to these kids as another generation stolen. Saying sorry was considered the first step to achieving reconciliation in Australia. That step was taken at the beginning of 2008. Now, here today in 2016, over 8 years later, the people are still waiting on the following steps to be taken. Indigenous Australians want the actions of their governments to reflect the sentiments of an actual heartfelt apology. Indigenous Australians across the nation are organizing and pushing their government for a treaty. They are calling on the rest of the world to back them. Too much time has passed, and the utterance of an apology no longer has any bearing. In order to really begin the process of reconciliation, the sovereignty of the Indigenous population has to be acknowledged.